had darkened, and still she couldn't find her way home. She didn't remember how long it had been since she'd lost her way. A while at least. The sun had still been shining as she followed the same familiar path back towards her house. It wound its way through the fields around her town, never taking the most direct route. Yet she knew it like a map and loved the well-worn passage that carried her back and forth like a current. She barely had to look up. She had never lost her way. But the path had gone. Somewhere she had stumbled and her feet had left the safety of the dark earth beneath them, the rest of the path disappearing from sight, lost within the forests of wheat and tall grass that seemed to grow taller around her. It was near dark now. Only the last glimpses of sunlight peeked over the horizon, illuminating the world so she was just able to make out the identical patches of farmland she was traipsing through. She was scared. There was little sound to fill her ears but the occasional chatter of birds. The sun had disappeared. With it went the last of her composure. She was plunged into darkness. The world which stretched out so far now drew in to crowd her. Circled by a suffocating mass of nothing, she quickened her pace, desperate to find anything which seemed familiar, something that could be followed with no direction, something that wasn't nothing. Nothing was all she found. Her fear grew to terror as she broke into a sprint, invisible fingers clawing behind her as she ran. She covered the ground quickly. It disappeared beneath her as new grass appeared. Resolve grew to go on. Nothing would cause her to stop until she met something she recognized. The thought cured a modicum of her fear. Then she stepped into the air. She met the ground of the little hill painfully as she rolled forwards, scraping and scratching down the length of her body until she stopped abruptly with a splash, lying face down in a paper-deep stream. She felt miserable. Cold and bloody, she lifted her dripping face from the ground, wanting desperately to cry. As she attempted to lift the rest of her body from the brook, she started, her eyes narrowing as the rest of her froze. A figure stood before her, his body slim and upright. He was pale and far off, his gaze staring to the distance beyond where she was now crouching. "Hello?" Her voice was soft and icy. The man didn't turn. She noticed his strange attire, clothes she didn't recognize, strips and bands of leather and fur patched together to form panels and scales. Small buttons of metal gleamed a pale light. Slowly he raised his arm. A torch she hadn't seen rose up within his grasp, its peak burning with a white fire. A wide grin suddenly broke across his face, and he began to stride forward, the soft glow which surrounded him trailing behind in pillows and wisps. The field behind him lit up. Like candles, hundreds more figures faded into view, scorching with the same white fire. The girl rubbed her eyes in disbelief, the cold forgotten for a moment as she stared at the procession marching past. Countless numbers of pale men and women in the same curious furs and leathers ran across where she was sitting. They danced and spun about one another, joy plastered across their ashen faces as they laughed and sang in utter silence. A group of young men swung primitive weapons, wielding them with wild abandon, chuckling to each other as they passed through their soft, milky bodies. The girl saw an old bearded man slapping his friend on the back, pointing to an ivory juggler with a gleam in his eye. The two could have been marble but for the life that they shared. The girl shuddered as the man turned in her direction and stopped. His friend drifted on with the others as they broke about him like a river about a stone. Fear grew within her once more, but it lingered just for a moment as the two shared a glance. The interest in his face quickly shedded as warmth rose from his deep wrinkles to each of his crooked teeth. All seemed still for a moment before he slowly bowed his head, then rose once more and filtered into the flow of his companions, the white streaks they left behind rising up like water. Eventually, no new arrivals appeared to continue the merry parade, and the bright glow of their festival began to shrink through the nearby hedgerow. One dancer left with the quiet blast of a great white horn, its music a tribute to the dark they left behind. The girl watched with a smile as the crowd faded away, until nothing but a single light was left alight. The leather-clad man turned with a grin, his watch fixed on the hollow where she lay. He raised his pale fist as the torch returned to his grasp, burning bright with white light. The land around him lit up with moonlight. Squinting, the girl could see where the dark hedge met a nearby field, where lines of wheat stretched off into the distance. A small break in the crop could be made out where a dusty passage wound its way around the corner. A warmth began to emerge in the girl's chest as she whipped her focus back towards the pale man. His body had all but gone. Only the impression of a grin remained. It too left with a glimmer as nothing came to take its place. All that lingered was a sliver of light, winding its way towards the neighbouring field.